Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 8th of July 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We're delighted to say we'll be joined by live video Skype link by David Scott with Northern Exposure. Before we start our news, we'll just say the weather's not too good here in Plymouth. It's still very grey and cold, so summer's definitely not arrived. But we understand north of the border, it's not too bad at all, with a bit of glimmer of sunshine. And we're told it's pretty hot and sweaty in Holland at the moment. So I think that means close is the word. Well, let's start off by Chilcot, because, of course, lessons have been learnt. Everything is now safe and organised. We just remind ourselves about the terms of reference, because it was to establish as accurately and reliably as possible what happened and to identify those lessons that can be learnt. So no problem there at all. We, of course, said we need to get real about this, because this is not about lessons being learnt. This is about action being taken to stop unlawful wars and genocide. And yesterday we apologised to the people of Iraq, and we certainly stand by that apology. Also say my credit where it's due, of course, because Mr. Corbyn apologised to the people of Iraq, and I think he's the only politician to have the courage to do that. But credit to Dr. Cornelia O'Leary, who sent us in this email, and I think she is spot on with it. She says, "Dear Brian, Chilcot and other inquiries, David Cameron and the other establishment figures invariably respond to government inquiries by saying that they have learned the lessons of these inquiries, and it's as if that is supposed to satisfy us. Yet they most definitely have not learned the single most important lesson, that if people are not held accountable for their actions, then the same bad actions continue to be perpetrated, as evidenced by the subsequent and continuing wars in Libya, Syria, Yemen, etc. Funny that." Well, that is a very, very astute email, and this really says it all. It isn't about lessons learnt. It's about bringing the truth and facts into the open, and then bringing those responsible to account. So we say to people, it is up to us to bring the criminal elements of the British government to account, and that will only happen if the wider public start to act in a lawful manner in unison. But I think it can be done.
An account, of course, is not holding a press conference with some crocodile tears.
Absolutely not, no. This is proper courts of law, and people should be punished if their crimes warrant that, but justice must prevail. Well, can the national newspapers keep up with things? We don't think so. We could have taken a number of articles. This is the Mail, heroes and villains. In the main, Chilcot didn't name names. Well, no, he didn't. So here, Quinton Letts identifies those who behave nobly and those who deserve contempt. So this is skewing things off and in the very headline, because it's not about people who deserve contempt. It's about who needs to be brought to justice. But at least he did identify people that should have been properly mentioned. And of course, we've got Dr. Kelly pictured there. So here's Quinton Letts, one of the very big names in journalism. And we were interested to see that in his list of villains, amongst other people, was Lord Hutton and Lord Butler. But the irony is, of course, that he didn't bother to mention that Chilcot was part of the Lord Butler villain team and still is. So here we've got either poor quality journalism or a deliberate attempt, of course, to skew the public away from the real truth.
It'd be good if they got their spelling correct in the headline. Behaved. Third line.
Indeed, yes, a little bit. Well, it's good to see, isn't it? Because occasionally the UK column has made a small typo, Mike, but we just copy other people.
We expect more from professionals, don't we? Yeah,
of course. Well, okay, so that's Chilcot, but under the surface, the great and the good are dressing up. And here's the Queen and a whole host of other important people, including members of the royal family, and they were apparently at St Giles Cathedral for the Order of the Thistle service. Now, you'd think that this was some sort of pantomime. I've got to say, the more I look into this stuff, the more disgusted I am. But these are the great and good of Scotland who have been brought into this most illustrious order. Part of the motto is "Don't mess with us because we'll get you," apparently. Well, we were interesting to see former NATO General Secretary there, Lord Robertson. He's of interest to many people. But we'd like to say, isn't it remarkable that none of these people at all, the great and the good in Scotland, they're all silent on child abuse. So as the Scottish inquiry has collapsed, and of course Miss O'Brien has just stepped down, we'll come on to that in more detail, is the great and good pouring out taxpayers' money in their fancy dress parade, but they don't want to speak out about children. Credit to your side of the water, Mike, because something different going on in Northern Ireland, Kincora Boys' Home. Information's coming out in the child abuse investigation there. But I just wanted to point this out that quite a lot of it revolves around testimony from former members of the military. So we've got Sergeant Hugh here, said that an alleged victim told him, look, to give you an idea of McGrath's perversions, he tried to get me to do it with animals. Just have a look at what the QC said. The Inquiry Counsel, Christine Smith QC, said that was something that stuck with you over the years because whilst it might seem outrageous today, certainly seemed even more outrageous back then. Is this woman saying that we are on the path to sex with animals is okay?
Well, she certainly doesn't seem to have any problem with it from those words.
No, it's, well, it was terrible then, but now, well, I
Not
don't
quite
think
so bad anymore.
Don't think we've got a problem. Well, leave that, all that be as it may. Let's bring in this because this is the key bit. The inquiry is supposedly examining claims that intelligence agencies covered up the crimes committed by a paedophile ring in Kincora to, here it is, blackmail some alleged high-profile abusers. Now, how an inquiry is digging into the secrets of Britain's intelligence services, I really don't know. I think that would take special branch at least, but apparently it's an inquiry. So let's just remind ourselves of the significance of this lot. We do it very quickly. We remember what's reported because, of course, accusations against Ken Clark that he didn't act on child abuse. We got David Cameron staunchly defending Lord Bramall. We've got Cameron saying that basically any suggestion that Westminster was not progressing child abuse investigations was sheer conspiracy theory, quote. So this is the situation at the moment. Westminster has lost child abuse files, and we know firsthand that major police investigations into abuse have been shut down with police officers threatened. And of course, we've got cases silenced, the Geoffrey Dickens MP dossier lost, Leon Britton, and so it goes on. England and Wales, well, we've got an abuse inquiry that faced delay and delay. That's apparently running, but they couldn't really get an independent chair. And so far, there's been little or no progress, but they have managed to lose some records, as you do. And we'll just say, interesting that, of course, we got the shutdown, Mickey Summers case, Melanie Shaw, Emma Sue, and thousands of others. And then, of course, Scotland is worse, if anything, because the inquiry has been collapsed after key members resign. And the cause of that stated is government interference. And we've recently been reporting on the Brian and Janice Doherty case, but of course we got Holly Gregg and hundreds of others. So over to Northern Ireland, and of course we've got, finally, we've got the child abuse investigation proceeding. What are they talking about? Mainly around Kincora's Boys' Home, but this is the key issue. We've got the connection back into British intelligence, which brings us back into the centre of the beast in Westminster. We've put this one up previously, but just for a quick run through, if anybody doubts that child abuse is used for blackmail, then look at the BBC video of Tory whip Tim Fortescue, who says quite calmly on camera, the MPs came to us with troubles concerning little boys, and we fixed it for them so that they would do as we asked. So there it is on BBC film, blackmail in Westminster. David, I'll just say any comments on that, because I know you're about to lead us into the Brian and Janice Doherty case.
Yeah, just a few quick comments, Brian, on the grounds that you covered there. It was actually George Galloway who it fell to on mainstream media and within the last 24 hours to point out that the Chilcot inquiry report contains enough information for a trial of Tony Blair on misconduct in public office, which is a crime at common law in England. And there is an equivalent crime in Scotland called breach of duty. We won't see that, of course, but he is right. That is what should happen. Regarding the great and the good at the Order of the Thistle ceremony in Edinburgh, yes, George Robertson is a very interesting chap. Strange CV. He was a bit of a surprise for his posting to run NATO, and he was, of course, the local MP in Dunblane. And when the Dunblane massacre happened, and it came out that Thomas Hamilton was the perpetrator, he exclaimed with great surprise that man has been in my living room. So very interesting character. And another man who was there with the Queen is David Steele. And David Steele is responsible for putting through the abortion legislation that has seen 200,000 unborn children killed in this country every year. And when that went through Parliament, we were assured it would reduce the number of abortions. And of course, what happened was quite the reverse.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, take us into the Doherty case, which for people who haven't listened to the audio, you can do that via the UK Column website. There are 10 sections. It is a story so remarkable that many people have emailed us to say it sounds like a horror story, a horror film, the plot from a horror film, which indeed it does, but it reflects the state of UK in 2016.
It does indeed, and that's the point that people need to understand. It's a very personal and very moving story, but it has much wider implications for everyone in this country. We had the great pleasure of having the company of Brian and Janice Doherty during this last week down with you in the UK Column office studio in Plymouth, and they have made a video recording that we're hoping to launch in the early part of next week that will summarise the case. It's not the long and detailed information that's on the audio files, but it covers the main points and will allow people to get a quick overview of what this loving couple are actually facing. The audio files are up and available for everyone to download. And we should also thank the very hard work of a Scottish lady who has been busy transcribing those audio files. And also thanks to Alex, who's been working on this as well. Now, what those transcribed files will be up shortly on the UK Column website. Now, this has a great deal of information in it, not only a transcription of the audios, but hyperlinks to all of the organisations mentioned. This makes it much easier to contact people, to ask questions, to demand answers. A wonderful resource, so I encourage everyone to seek that out. On the general investigation, we're getting a lot of help. A lot of people are contacting us, and we're starting to dig and assemble information about the Doherty case. It's very difficult because obviously people in authority do not want to be talking about this, but information is coming forward. This next slide here shows the general lie of land. This is where the Dohertys were staying. The house circled in yellow is the East Lodge at Crim and Mogate, and that was where the Dohertys were staying. And the one immediately adjacent to it, circled in red, is where the man Alan Lowe, who approached them and offered them £25,000 for the son, that's where he is staying. And you see just above the Doherty's house there's a little junction, and that's the rear access to Crim and Mogate house itself, which is the large manor house, which is used for your weddings and functions, as well as a home for the Viscount and his family. So that's the lie of the land. That shows you where you are. It's in North East Scotland, and it's not far from both Fraserburgh and Peterborough. Fraserburgh and Peterhead.
Right. And I think we just emphasise that that is a relatively remote location. So when events took place around the family, for example, they're talking about men being around the property late at night. They're talking about criminal damage with the intent to harm, glass being loosened in the greenhouse. This was a very frightening environment to be in, particularly when they discovered that Police Scotland were not going to give them any help.
Well, quite. That's visible on Google Earth or Bing Maps or any of these websites, and you'll see that round about there are a few scattered houses, but it's very rural. It's very quiet. At night, it's almost totally black in a winter's night, and there's no street lights in the surrounding area or anything like that.
Okay. Now, we have got a number of members of the public have started to be motivated and to take action, including writing some very well-constructed and measured letters to authorities. We've just chosen one to give an example, and we, of course, are stressing that anybody that wants to help in this case, what we are encouraging is people to do things in a professional, measured, polite and reasonable way. This is so important. We certainly don't want to encourage anybody to fire off angry emails on the spur of the moment. That will be unhelpful. But this is one letter that is particularly measured and pertinent. Could you give us a little bit of a run through the key elements that this person?
Yes, this is written to the Chief Constable of Police Scotland, Phil Gormley, and the person writes with a whole series of questions. First one here is, how can Police Scotland justify not investigating the man who offered Brian Doherty £25,000 for access to his autistic son, when the man in question has admitted that he did, he did in fact do so. The second question is, why, less than 24 hours after Brian Doherty reported that Alan Lowe, the occupant of a neighbouring property on Viscount Petersham's Crimmon-Mulgate estate, had offered him £25,000 for access to his son, did Sergeant Buchan of Police Scotland Fraserburgh arrive on his doorstep and attempt to persuade Mr Doherty with considerable persistence that there was nothing to be concerned about? And on it goes. These are a whole series of questions which relate to the conduct of Police Scotland, principally at the early part of the case. And they are very pertinent questions indeed. Another one here, why did PC Lamont, the female officer who allegedly wrote a concern report to social services attacking Mr and Mrs Doherty and their children, have no knowledge of the contents of her own report? That's a very good question. It is a police concern report that mobilised social services and the whole child protection paraphernalia of the state and directed it against the Doherty family, and that report would appear to be fraudulent. We need to know much more about that. We need to know who, and we need that fully and thoroughly investigated. Okay,
we'll just say, David, for people who may not yet be fully familiar with this case, first of all, we'll say do go to the UK Column website and have a listen to the audio, hear the testimony of the parents themselves. But you look at the massive state effort in Scotland via the police, via the courts, via social services, via local authorities to hound, harass and silence this family. And then, of course, when they move over the water to Ireland, just the same state resources are put into silencing them. And of course, our prospective Prime Minister candidate, Theresa May, and her office, who know full well about this case, they do the opposite. They do absolutely nothing. There's something very, very strange going on here where the state can mobilise this amount of, this number of assets in order to persecute a family who have not even been accused of any crime whatsoever. But when we see our government taking the country to war based on lies and falsification of intelligence reports, there's apparently nobody who can do anything about it. the contrast is becoming a little bit too clear, I think.
Indeed. I would also say that anyone contacting organisations like Police Scotland, what you will get by way of return is a claim that data protection legislation prevents any discussion with anybody not involved in the case, therefore go away. I would point out that the Data Protection Act has an overriding public interest exemption. It does not give Police Scotland the right to cover up their own criminal wrongdoing. There is a public interest test here, and not to be dissuaded by such obviously transparent attempts to cover up and distract from what's really going on.
Okay. Well, David, directly relevant, of course, big ructions in the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry. Can you take us through what's been happening and what you think the position is at the moment north of the border?
Yes, this first headline here, this I think is possibly the worst headline, the most deceptive and misleading headline I can remember seeing in many a long year. Child abuse inquiry in disarray after chairwoman quits in row over offensive comments to survivors. Now, there's many things wrong with this headline. One is she did not make any offensive comments. That would suggest she made some sort of offensive comments to survivors. She did nothing of the sort. The comments that this refers to are not comments to survivors. They're comments that a third party thought might be offensive to survivors, but were in fact a comment quoting something that a survivor had said. So it's a highly misleading headline from the Daily Record. Why would the Daily Record be trying to cover up the government's position in this and protect the government from entirely valid criticism? I don't know, but it seems very strange. What actually happened was first Professor Lamb and then Susan O'Brien QC, the head of the inquiry, resigned, and both cited Scottish Government interference in an allegedly independent inquiry as the reason. What came out in the O'Brien resignation letter, however, was much more, that the interference had comprised pressure on her personally, going back for months, and there was an attempt to remove her by the Scottish Government from the inquiry because she had not been sufficiently cooperative to the way they wanted her to run her independent inquiry. Now, this pressure came from a couple of reported comments which were viewed as being beyond the pale, and these were blown up into a major issue and used to call her chairwomanship of the inquiry into question. The person who reported these comments was Dr. Claire Fyvie. Now, this is her giving evidence to the Scottish Parliament, one of the committees in the Scottish Parliament. Now, Dr. Claire Fyvie runs a specialist clinic for dealing with people suffering from traumatic stress. Now, this can be ex-military or people from the general public, even jurors who have had to go through very traumatic trials and hear harrowing evidence. So it covers a full range of people who might have some sort of problem with traumatic stress. It receives a very generous grant from the Scottish Government, but Dr. Fyvie herself is actually a former SNP candidate in central Scotland. So she is hardly independent of the Scottish Government. It seems very strange that this person who runs the clinic she runs is called the River Centre. So she gets government money. She's an SNP candidate, presumably still an SNP member. She's the only person who took exception to something that the head of this inquiry said. This was reported and blown up into an enormous crisis and used to threaten the position of the head of the inquiry. It seems something out of nothing. It seems an obvious attack on the head of the independent inquiry by the Scottish Government. And where does the inquiry in Scotland go from here? Because any inquiry set up by this government must be tarnished with the same suggestion of control, of direction, of lack of independence that this inquiry has had. This next slide here, the survivors want a judge to lead the crisis hit inquiry. The survivors also want an extension to the terms of reference, because the terms of reference were far too narrow. The terms of reference for this inquiry were only residential accommodation run by the state or certain churches. Therefore, if you were a day pupil in these same institutions and you were sexually abused, you were not within the terms of reference of the inquiry. An obvious nonsense and failure to tackle the real problem, and a way of excluding the vast majority of victims and survivors.
And of course helping to protect the state. So where the state is caring for the child and there's abuse, well, that isn't really abuse. You've got another headline from News Politics here: child sex abuse victims being bullied by state to drop redress claims. This fits, sorry, David, this fits the picture with England and Wales, of course. Same thing has gone on there.
Yes, this is into the Republic of Ireland, and the same thing's happening. That abuse survivors are told, well, if you want to pursue this, you're going to be crippled with court costs. And they're being, by this means, induced to abandon claims and abandon the search for justice because of the threats of crippling financial burdens being imposed upon them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Police Scotland can't investigate child abuse. They can do what they like with AMPR records. So, just very quickly before we move on, what's been happening here?
Yes, it transpires that Police Scotland have licence plate records taken from automatic licence plate recognition machines all across Scotland. They're holding all of these all the way back to 2012. Some 200 million records a year they currently hold. Earlier records are only vehicles of interest, so those records are only 80,000 or so. But if you've been to Scotland in your car since 2012, be assured that Police Scotland know about it.
Yeah. Well, at least we can trust them to look after our well-being, or not. Sorry, that is black humour, because sometimes we don't quite know how to get across the seriousness of things. Before we move on to subject of Dallas, we just say that Ian Crane's AV7 DVDs are available now via the UK column. So if you would like to see some of those key speakers, you weren't able to attend the event, you can get those by simply coming onto the website and
right. While we're doing advertisements,
yes,
I'll just mention that we have released to the public, rather than just to members, the interview that David did with Gillett Atzman a couple of weeks ago. Now that's at the moment just available on YouTube. I'll have it up on the website over the weekend. But David, just 2 minutes or a few seconds on that conversation.
Well, it was a very interesting conversation. I enjoyed speaking to him enormously, and we covered a lot of ground to do with Jewish identity politics and the wider implications it has for the world, for the Middle East, and also similarities and differences between Great Britain and the United States and the culture and political establishment within Israel and within the wider Jewish diaspora. So we covered a lot of ground. I hope people will tune into that and find it as interesting as I did.
Okay, good stuff. Now we're going to move on to Dallas. A week or two ago, Patrick and I were bringing Patrick into the office at the moment, and we were discussing some things on the way into the office. And Patrick made the suggestion that really we should put some of our conversations on video because we're sort of losing some stuff. So as an introduction to the Dallas situation, we're just going to show a short 3-minute clip from the recording we did this morning, because some of the points that Patrick made were excellent. So here we go.
Okay, so America staged a Maidan last night in Dallas, Texas, right? So imagine, if you can believe this, right? So there's a cop killing a young black guy in some Dallas suburb, and then a Black Lives Matter protest was staged on the streets of Dallas, right? And all these hundreds or thousands of people marching downtown Dallas, and all of a sudden, last night around 9 p.m., sniper fire from multiple positions shoots and kills 5 police officers and wounds 6 others. And these are meant to be Black Lives Matter left-wing snipers positioned in buildings. One of them was held up in a book depository in Dallas. Okay, and this isn't with the backdrop of a major multi-agency first responder and police drill, more or less echoing a very similar scenario in Texas. So are we meant to believe that this has happened as advertised? So what does this remind you of? The Maidan.
Yeah.
The Maidan snipers in buildings shot police officers. Syria as well in Homs. So this is a tried and tested tactic of destabilization, although in America it's slightly of a more theatrical flavor.
So this is not only going to cause have political ramifications, but more gun control.
It's
propaganda.
This is one of the crown jewels right now. This one, so this is going to tick all boxes. Okay, first box, it takes Hillary Clinton off the headlines. Boom, away she goes.
Yeah,
that's the last we'll ever hear of Hillary's emails. So tick that box. Second box, this brings Trump into the headlines. Trump's now coming out and decrying, and Trump supporters, the Black Lives Matter radical left-wing movement. Okay, so this is ratcheting up the strategy of tension on the left and the right. Okay, this is preparing for hopefully some American civil unrest. Whoever designed this wants, they hope for American civil unrest this summer, especially in the run-up to the election in November. They want it to intensify.
Yeah.
Okay, so they want to see some real street clashes. So when you stage these events, I think the object of staging some of these events is that you'll hope that real events will manifest on their own in the streets.
Yes.
Okay, so that's kind of like obviously what it looks like to me. It's completely contrived. Okay, and so then calls for gun control. They used long range AR-15 type or semi-automatic, long range rifles. So gun control will be front and center. So both the left and the right can feed off this event and benefit from it. But the state is the ultimate beneficiary, because the state will use this to increase security measures. And guess what else, Mike? Make protests. You can't have protests in the streets because of safety. Okay, this is also designed to create a chilling effect. So the only protests you'll see on American streets are foundation-funded, state-approved, fake protests. Okay, this is what these events are designed to do.
So there we go. That's our introduction to Dallas. Now, David, we'll just move on, because the Edinburgh Police Scotland, calling this a thin blue line. Some people may not get what that means. Give us a bit of a clue here.
Yes, this is a strange and quite a troubling comment. So they're seeing common cause with the Dallas police who have been killed here, and they make this reference to the thin blue line. Now, this is analogous to the thin red line, but the thin red line was, of course, referring to the Argyll and Southern Highlanders at Balaclava, and that's a military operation. So if we're talking about the thin blue line, we're talking about a narrow, a small force holding back waves of attack, and holding back the enemy. Now, what I want to know is, when Police Scotland say that, or when any police force says that, who exactly are they seeing as the enemy? Is this an us and them mindset that we're seeing develop here? Is this siege mentality that we're seeing developing here? I think there's an element in the United States where that's the case, where you have a culture within the police force. And remember, police are killing over 1,000 people every year in the United States.
In fact, we've got this Guardian article here
Yes,
the
this is very
counted?
interesting. It's figures here. So it's over 1,000 a year. So this is the total for the first 6 months of 2016. So we see 566 so far this year. It also breaks it down based on ethnic um, type of the victim, and also on a state-by-state approach across America. The around 30% of the victims are described as black. Now, that is obviously more than the proportion of the black population in America, but given the levels of crime in the black community, actually probably a little less than I would have thought. So you're talking about getting on for 70% being white. And what this Guardian article also shows is the faces. And you see every type of human being in those faces looking out at you. It's very striking. And it's always couched in terms of Black Lives Matter and it's some form of racism. But if you look at the races of the victims and the races of the shooters, that doesn't seem to hold up. And I wonder if, in falling for this Black Lives Matter narrative, we're simply allowing more divide and conquer, and we're allowing ourselves to be split into different races and different groups, when there's something much more fundamental happening. It's the state versus the people.
David, very interesting point. I've got an eye on the time here, so I'll just interject with this very quickly. But we need to remember who is training the police. I haven't got details of the American side. We can have a look at that. But certainly in UK, Scotland, Wales, England, we've got some extraordinary people now come into the frame. So police training college run by a lady psychiatrist. We've had common purpose in amongst the police. We have proof of neuro-linguistic programming being used, absolute proof of that being used, including with Police Scotland. And now we're starting to see the police behave in a very cold, detached way. The phrase, I think, is desensitised. This is a real objective, that we've now got police who don't think in terms of protecting the public. They, as you say, regard the public, or increasingly regard the public, as an enemy to be crushed with whatever tool they're given, be it a taser or a firearm. This is very dangerous stuff, and I think we'll be looking at this in more detail over the coming weeks.
Well, we've had the countdown, and now the event has started. Here is the NATO summit today, and there's Jens Stoltenberg standing up and giving his opening remarks earlier on. What did he have to say? He said that the Cold War is history, and it should remain so. And this idea, or this message of defense and dialogue, is a message that unifies the alliance. And since we are unified, we're also able to implement and to deliver on our decisions. That's what he had to say. He said that Russia is an integral part of European security. He said that we have launched a wholesale reform and reinforcement of our collective defense and deterrence, the biggest since the end of the Cold War. The NATO response force is now 3 times bigger, with a brigade-sized spearhead force at its core, able to move within days. And he said, of course, that NATO, however, does not seek confrontation.
No, it just acts as if it does.
Yes, indeed. So kind of mixed messages from Stoltenberg, because he went on to say that we will also reaffirm our commitment to our partners in the East, Ukraine, Georgia, and the Republic of Moldova, to help them resist outside pressures and advance reforms. So the outside pressures can only be one thing. And in fact, this was echoed yesterday, I think, by Angela Merkel, who said Moscow has undermined European security in words and deeds by infringing Ukraine's borders, and they have profoundly disturbed NATO's eastern members, who therefore require the unambiguous backup of the alliance.
Utter lies, propaganda of a vast scale, Mike. I think it's astonishing to see how blatant this is now.
And since this is being held in Warsaw, we shouldn't leave out Andrzej Duda, who is the president of Poland. He said, in the face of the changing situation in the security environment in our part of the world, in Central and Eastern Europe, it is necessary to strengthen the presence and potential of NATO. And he said, together we have to ensure that anyone who, if only for a moment, is tempted to apply the law of force would come to understand very quickly this simply does not pay off. But it's not just this type of rhetoric at the summit itself, because of course our old friends Rusi have to get in on the act. And here we are, Russia and NATO eroding the foundations of relations. They say the NATO-Russia Founding Act is the most important legal instrument governing relations between the alliance and Moscow. That's NATO and Moscow. Unfortunately, it's not working, and Russia has violated the act on numerous occasions, they claim. The 1997 Founding Act laid the foundation for NATO-Russia relations for a decade, yet arguably Moscow started to contravene the Founding Act's principles, and especially the obligation to refrain from threat of force against each other soon after the document was signed. In December 1999, Yeltsin emotionally, if indirectly, invoked the nuclear threat, arguing that Russia was not being treated fairly by the US. This curious and menacing rhetoric was also repeated on a number of subsequent occasions, especially after 2013. And so it goes on. The same, the hypocrisy in accusing others of using any kind of emotional and threatening rhetoric is unbelievable.
And that is the Royal United Services Institute, of course, Mike. So the all those nice people we saw earlier, the Order of the Prickly Thistle, they're all behind this one as well.
Yes. Before we move on, any thoughts, David?
Well, I mean, the problem with the Russians is, of course, they keep moving their country closer to our military bases. And I seem to recall there was, in fact, a guarantee given that when the Warsaw Pact was removed from the grand chessboard, that there would be no eastward expansion of NATO. So we don't seem to have stuck to that.
Well, in fact, the US denies that. They say that it was a kind of a verbal agreement, nothing really to, verbal contracts don't count for anything, David.
Well, they do in Scots law, but never mind. We have also huge hypocrisy. I saw a British government minister within the last week talking about how the Russians had undermined Europe by creating the migrant crisis because of their policy in Syria. Now, this is just fantasy. Who's been destabilizing Syria? It's not the Russians. It's our own wise overlords.
The same overlords that we've just had the Chilcot inquiry showing that basically they lied, falsified intelligence material, politicized intelligence material, all to achieve what they wanted in the first place, which was regime change. The picture's pretty clear, really. Yes. We're now just seeing it on a bigger scale.
Now, moving on to global governance or global government. This is a subject we've covered extensively over the years, and one question that we've always asked has been, what would be the main path to world government? Would it be through the EU-UN sort of model, or would it be through the Commonwealth? Well, here we are. Here is the Commonwealth website, and they're talking about 3360 Town Hall. And what's this about? Well, the Commonwealth Secretary-General invites you to tackle some of the world's most pressing challenges today. This is a leadership program. And here is what the Secretary-General had to say. The world faces enormous challenges. We need you to be part of the solution. Now, who's running this? I can't imagine. It couldn't be, but it is. It is Common Purpose 3360. What they say, 3360 is a leadership program that equips aspiring Commonwealth leaders aged 18 to 30 with the skills and the networks to make a difference now. Young people will work within an international group to develop solutions to some of the planet's most pressing issues. They will also get the chance to present their ideas to the Commonwealth Secretary-General as she searches for exciting new initiatives to champion on the global stage. And this is taking place today. A conversation with that Secretary-General, Baroness Scotland, hosted by the Vice-Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Now, 3360, as I say, is a leadership program. They say that it equips young Commonwealth leaders with the skills that they need. They say that the world needs leaders now. Brian, we need more leaders because we haven't got enough leaders. The world's falling apart with the leaders that we have, so we need some more. And so they're encouraging us, if you're young enough, to be a leader with 3360.
Chosen leaders, of course.
Yes.
Selected and chosen leaders.
Yes, and of course they point out that the Commonwealth is home to 2.2 billion citizens, of which more than 60% are under the age of 30. Now, the question is, what happens on this programme? Well, as a participant, you would get the opportunity to tackle a challenge of fundamental importance to the Commonwealth and the wider world. And in this case is, what can our generation of the Commonwealth do now to make our cities more inclusive and safe in 2030? And they're going to explore those challenges, through in-depth conversations with talented leaders from all sectors, behind-the-scenes visits to a range of incredible organisations. So which organisations are we talking about? Amnesty International, First Heritage Cooperative Credit Union, Independent Jamaica Council for Human Rights, Jamaica Constabulary Force, Jamaica Observer, the Ministry of Local Government, and then we get into the big boys, PricewaterhouseCoopers and the World Bank. They're going to engage with an interactive online content, and they're going to engage, they're going to carry out group work with other exceptional young leaders. So there you go. The Commonwealth, absolutely a target for common purpose.
En route to world government.
Indeed. And of course, one thing that needs to be put in place before we reach world government or world global governance is the subversion of British common law and British ways of doing things. So here is the Lord Chief Justice. This is tweeted out by the Law Society Gazette because he's calling for a modern code for criminal law. Needed, here it is. And a new effort to codify the criminal law to make it easier to understand, apparently, because we're just too stupid to understand the law anymore. And it's long overdue, the Lord Chief Justice has said. And he's recommending drafting a single document that sets out the nature of criminal conduct. So I guess he's going to try to do that on a single side of A4 or something like that. It is long overdue for clarification and simplification. He says we ought to be able to look at a single document that sets out the nature of criminal conduct, in other words, a modern code. No one should suggest that we should all be our own physicians, even if what some describe as Dr. Google is the modern neurotic's best friend, he said, whatever that means. So this is Lord John Thomas, just to give him his name. But basically, we're going to throw out the constitution of this country and replace it with something which is modern and therefore European in style.
But of course, the public hasn't been asked whether they wish this. This has just been decided by our future leaders.
Absolutely.
With his dead sheep on his head.
The
good news.
The good news.
There is good news.
Yeah, there is good news. We are definitely having a female Prime Minister. It could either be Theresa May or Andrea Leadsom.
That's the two-headed monster at the moment, of course.
Yes, indeed.
Double-headed monster.
Yes. So, David, you wanted to point out that Andrea Leadsom, of course, has been lobbying for more support for parents and children. So that must be good news as well.
Well, you might think so, but you would be wrong. The lobbying here is to increase the early intervention agenda of the state. So the state has to intervene basically before a child is 2. 3 is too late. So it's all about early intervention. This is the same set of ideas and junk science that underpins named person in Scotland and all other attacks by the state on the family all around the world. And she seems to be wholeheartedly supporting that. So that rather flies in the face of the traditional old school conservative family values agenda that she is claiming to stand upon.
So is she nailing her colours to the mast for a named person for the whole of the United Kingdom, do you think?
Well, that would be the implication. She's certainly buying wholeheartedly and pushing wholeheartedly along the agenda that underpins named person. How far she'd go, well, only time will tell, but she's already surrendered all the important high ground.
Yes, and so we'll end on this one. 199 Tory MPs want May. Doesn't that just tell you where their sympathies lie?
Yeah, I thought this was very interesting. So this is a Twitter a tweet in favour of Ms. Leadsom. Now, there she is standing in an old English church, looking very traditional and trustworthy. So she's trying to present there a particular image, a particular appearance, a particular, harking back to the past. You can see how this would appeal to a lot of Conservative members, because this is an election only amongst Conservative Party members. But what we're seeing and what she's actually doing with the early intervention in family life agenda is quite the reverse.
Indeed. That's us.
That's it. Well, thank you, David, for joining us. Thank you to our viewers and listeners for joining us. What interesting times we live in. It's up to us, the general public, to do something about it. It's not for us just to sit and observe what these people tell us, want, and would have us believe. We need to make sure they're doing our bidding, not the other way around. So a lot of work to be done. Thank you to all of you who've taken out subscriptions or made a donation. If you can manage to subscribe to us, it is a very big help. We would like to do more. We would like to do more interviews. Very often that means being able to be in the same room as people who don't have money to travel, don't have money to buy laptops or communicate. So in order to get news to you, we do need income. And if you can help, please consider making that subscription. Thank you, David. We'll be back same time on Monday. Have a good weekend and see what you can do to challenge the state as this close down continues. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.